Hi, and welcome to Wine Botany. This episode is about natural wines. And natural wines are getting more and more popular, and for a good reason, they are just amazing. And this is an introduction to them, to natural wines, and we are going to talk what they're all about. And to illustrate this, I chose this amazing wine, which is called Chëpìka. Chëpìka means root in the Lenape language, which is the Delaware Trade native language. And it is the brainchild of two people, the winemaker Nathan Kendall, winemaker in the Finger Lakes in the New York State, and Pascaline Lepelletier, the first female to get the two titles of Meilleur Ouvrier de France and Meilleur Sommelier de France, Best Sommelier of France in 2018 last year, and who is also the co-owner of the restaurant Racines in New York City. So those two people are of course passionate about wine, but they want to make a change, and they are passionate about nature, environment. And if it wasn't challenging enough, they decided to create that Chëpìka, which is a wine which recreates the traditional way wines are made, once were made in the Finger Lake region. And for this, what they did, they used the ancestral method for this pétnat, which is a pétillant naturel. French means natural sparkling, and we're gonna explain what it is. And they also use indigenous grape. This one is 100% Catawba, which is a US grape, an American grape variety. And if you watch previous episode of Wine Botany about taxonomy, you know that the American group is not really used anymore to make wine, except like grape juice and things like this. Since Vitis vinifera, the European grape variety, was imported and more successful in that, because the indigenous American grapes are more known for their foxy taste, a little bit more spicy and high acidity, except that they have, of course, a huge importance in fighting the phylloxera, this bug that almost destroyed the European vineyards in the 19th century, and on which the European rootstock are grafted. So those American grape varieties co-evoluted with that bug, and so they can resist that pest. So let's jump right into the world of natural wines and explain what they are. And we'll come back to the Chëpìka and the tasting just after that. So a simple definition for natural wine could be wines made out of nature-friendly grown grapes, with low intervention and nothing added or removed from the winemaking process. Sounds good, right? It is. But in order to clarify what all of this means, let's look at what natural wines are not. And for this, let's have a look at the different ways of farming, different farming ways today, different ways of making wine today. On the bottom of the scale, you have the conventional way. What we call conventional way is the use of chemicals, which is permitted at all levels, from the culture in the vineyards to the cellar. And there are lots of them used. Even with a big cleanup between 1993 and 2009 from the European Union, banning like more than 700 chemical substances, there are still lots of substances used. Of course, you need to control pests and diseases. You need to control the fermentation process, the whole winemaking process. But unfortunately, lots of mass-produced wines over-abuse those chemicals, which are really detrimental to environment and to our health. And this is more with the production and profit in mind, rather than making a good wine and being more careful about environment and people. So how do chemicals affect the environment and our health? Well, let's just mention a few points. First of all, the chemicals kill the organisms in the soil. And those organisms are essential for two major aspects, which are soil structure and nutrient uptake. For instance, a plant needs, of course, nutrients and micronutrients, and we'll come back in further episodes of Wine Botany. But some microorganisms are essential for this. For instance, 90% of all vascular plants develop a mutual relationship, beneficial relationship between their roots and fungi, which is called mycorrhizae. And this works in the way that fungi benefits from the sugar, the carbohydrates produced by photosynthesis by the plants. They nourish the fungi, and the fungi in exchange get some nutrient that the plant needs and can't reach. So it helps the plant grow. Another aspects are those plants which are called nitrogen fixing plants. Nitrogen is not in a usable form natural in its natural state, but some plants develop nodules, which is a result of an infection for some bacteria, and those bacteria are able to transform the nitrogen into a usable form for plants. And so it's a symbiotic, beneficial relationship as well. Chemicals could leak as well in the environment. Chemicals could lead to the change of soil structure by killing those organisms, leading to the soil being more resembling of a concrete mass rather than an aerated mass of organic and healthy soil, which could lead to erosion as well. So it also requires high energy input, and it could be detrimental to workers. Of course, you have lots and lots more lawsuits by people develop like crazy and very bad diseases by the overusing chemicals. And at the end of the chain, of course, you can have residues in your glass of wine, which is not good for your health. To mention as well that we went from all of this has been developed in the 20th century with the development of the chemical industry, of course. But we went from a polyculture to a monoculture, which means that all the natural enemies of the pests and diseases, lots of various plants, and you can still find that in Georgia, in this Middle Eastern country, where wines are grown naturally. Those plants bring natural predators to pests and diseases. With the use of pesticides and monoculture, those natural enemies disappear, which means you need more and more pesticides, and the bugs become resistant to those pesticides, which means you use of more pesticides for this, and more fertilizers as well, because you don't have those microorganisms, this biodiversity in the ecosystem in order to nourish the plant. So it's a vicious cycle. On top of that, the next step when you harvest the grapes in order to make the juice is the fermenting process. Fermentation comes from yeast, those microorganisms that yeast the sugar contains in the berries and transform it into alcohol with a byproduct of carbon dioxide, the gas that is used to make sparkling wines. In the conventional way of making wines, those yeasts are usually killed, eliminated, in order to replace them by artificially lab-grown yeast. And you have catalogs, entire catalogs, where you can choose which strain of yeast you want in order to make your wine more fruity, less or more acidic, to play with the flavors, with the aromas, because yeast have a huge impact on controlling the fermentation process, the speed of the fermentation, and the flavors and aromas. After this process of using lab-grown yeast, there are dozens of additives you can add to the juice, to the fermented juice, in order to produce a wine. Those are used to stabilize the wine, to filter the wine, to preserve the wine, to aromatize the wine, to acidify or deacidify the wine. It's manipulating the juice in a crazy way. And some of them could be allergenic as well. If you're allergic to dairy products, you have to know that to find the wine, to make it clearer, which is more accepted, you think that if it's not clear, not filtered, it could be bad, but not at all. But if you want a clear wine, you find the wine, and most of the time you use products like casein, which is the milk protein. You use albumin, which is the egg whites, and those are dairy products. So if you are looking for vegan wines, look for natural wines because they don't use that kind of products. So if we summarize the conventional way of making wine, you have a wine that comes, if I caricature, from a plant and steroids, living in a lifeless soil, literally like a drug addict soil. They need like chemicals in order to survive and to nourish the plant, fed on lab-grown yeast, not natural yeast, and where the taste is manipulated by those lab-grown yeast and lots of additives in order to get the product that fits to the market, to what people want. That definitely doesn't sound very appetizing. And that's where other types of farming exist today, and people get more and more self-conscious about that, and that's an extremely beneficial aspect of winemaking, of course. The next step being like sustainable wines. It's a little bit like a catch-all term because it's being more careful about the environment, less use chemicals, but you never know, there are no bodies or organization controlling that, so it's a little bit more blurry in terms of knowing what exactly happens, what the wine growers and winemakers do with that. But the next step is organic wines, where the use of chemicals are prohibited, except the use of some sulfur and copper to fight pest and disease. But there is a 3 years period of conversion, which is controlled by organizations. So this definitely leads to being more cautious about what you do in the vineyards. And on top of this, you have biodynamic wines, which comes from that movement called the anthroposophy, developed by that person, Rudolf Steiner, in the 20th century. A movement that could be a little bit controversial, but shows lots of beneficial aspects. You have to be organically certified first to be in biodynamic. And it works a little bit like herbalisms, in health aspect, which means like you focus on boosting the immune system of the vineyards, of the living organism, by using preparation, and also taking into consideration the solar system and the phases of the moon that defines, when to harvest or when to bottle the wine. And to consider the farm as a self-sufficient unit. And for this, I want to mention, that comes to my mind, of course, other ways of cultivating. We talk about polyculture versus monoculture, but you have permaculture, for instance, which is an amazing design way of making different functions, different entities working together and making the 1 + 1 = 3 aspects of the holistic approach in a farm unit. So that's definitely another aspect to have in mind, and I will mention some books that are very interesting to read about that. On top of all of this, you have the natural wines. Here we come. So those wines, now we can come back to our definition of wines made from nature-friendly grown grapes. You don't use chemical fertilizer, pesticide, but natural wines. Low intervention, you use indigenous grapes, indigenous yeasts, and nothing added or removed, not those additives, except perhaps a few sulfites, and still it's very, very much controlled at bottling. So you can see that those natural wines are quite interesting to explore. And let's talk more about the Chëpìka now. So I mentioned this wine is made by those two people, Nathan Kendall and Pascaline Lepelletier, and they did an amazing job. It is absolutely amazing. This wine, when you smell it, it's like close your eyes and you're in a meadow in the middle of the Finger Lakes region. It's full of honey aromas, very pungent flower aromas, and the taste is so refreshing. You can find red fruits like raspberry, definitely, with this little kick typical to the natural wines, a little bit more salty, sour, but not overpowering. And that's another aspect of natural wine which is worth mentioning, which is about discovering the real taste of wine, rediscovering other flavors you couldn't find, in conventional wines. You have a full spectrum of taste. Of course, you have good and bad wines, in every kind of winemaking process. But natural wines offer a full spectrum of those tastes, from the one closest to the conventional wines to the most funkiest, of taste. It makes me think actually of the art world, music or literature, of painting, of modern art, where you think out of the box, you discover something else, You have to bring that being open-minded, being open to discover new flavors, being open to enjoy and being surprised, with those flavors that could be highly rewarding because of the pleasure and the various ways of enjoying wine that you might discover in there. So this one is 100% Catawba. Catawba was historically very important in the 19th century because it was one of the major grapes from which wines were made before the import between Vitis vinifera took over. There are three hypotheses about its origin. It hasn't been DNA profiled, so we don't know for sure, but one of them is that it's a pure wild native Vitis labrusca US grape varieties. The other hypothesis, it's a hybrid, nature hybrid between Vitis labrusca and Vitis aestivalis, another grape varieties. And the third one could be a cross between Vitis labrusca and Vitis vinifera. It's a red grape, of course, and it shows large berries and mid-sized bunches, and it's quite vigorous, but it ripens late, so you have to have a place where it ripens. The growing season goes far during the year. It's quite susceptible as well to black rot and to downy mildew, and to less extent to powdery mildew, and those are diseases we will talk more about in another episode of Wine Botany. So we saw that natural wines definitely are about living in harmony with nature, taking into consideration the environment, other living organisms, and your health. And as well being more typical of the terroir, because those indigenous yeasts, which are used, for instance, in that wine, the Chëpìka is made without, the grapes are organically grown. They use indigenous grape varieties, indigenous yeast, and they don't add additives to the winemaking process. To mention as well that it is a pet nat, a natural sparkling. Usually to make sparkling wines, you have the traditional method, which is you first make a still wine during the first fermentation, what we call the first fermentation, where the alcohol is made and the first set of gas, goes away. And then you add a mixture of yeast and sugar that creates another production of gas, and that's what makes the product like champagne or sparkling wines. In this method, which is more traditional, which is thought to be the oldest method, it's called the ancestral method, where there is not adding yeast and sugar. It's the first fermentation is right away bottled, and the wine creates that natural gas, and which is part of the bottle. So you will see that there is a very light or moderate fizziness to that wine. That's why they don't close it with the usual type of cork, because the pressure is less. Nonetheless, it's a very pleasant, refreshing wine that you will definitely enjoy, and the work they have done on this wine is particularly spectacular. To finish this episode, I wanted to mention and to refer to a few books. I love books, and I'm going to mention a few of them. I talk about permaculture. Of course, you have this book, which is the reference by Bill Monison. You have an introduction to permaculture, which is the lighter version of it. I would recommend the 1994 version of it, which is more complete than the newest one. To complete the permaculture process, I want to mention two other books. Gaia's Garden, which is amazing if you want to apply those processes no matter the size of your garden in there, and the Resilient Farm and Homestead, which shows in application in real life, farm by Ben Falk to the permaculture aspect. There are many other ones. I'll let you discover, or I can please contact me for other references. I would be happy to share them. And regarding natural wines, if you want to explore further, one is, you can't escape, is this one, Natural Wine by Isabelle Legeron, who is a master of wine. She got this very famous diploma, and she's completely switched. She left this industry of wine to go to natural wine. She started with a little gathering of people about natural wine, and now she created the raw wine fair and conventions, bringing thousands of people around the world. You have one this year in 2019 in New York City, happening in October, and you can find the link here. You can find all information about that. And if you want a little bit more technical aspect that covers whole history and aspect of natural winemaking, I would definitely read this Biodynamic Organic Natural Winemaking from Britt and Per Carlson, which cover all those aspects, and you will know all about natural wines. So I hope you enjoy this episode. I hope you will definitely look further, or at least give a chance to natural wines, because you might be happily surprised, but I warn you, once you explore more and discover more wines, more natural wines, you might find it difficult to come back to drink conventional wines. So thanks for watching, drink wisely, and see you soon. Cheers!